So who are you looking at here coming up at the end of the sixth round? You still need a quarterback too, but I could easily see you going a different direction as well.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at the board. Like same when you were on the clock. There's three teams, including myself, that still need a quarterback too. The other two teams kind of waited late, like I did, to get their QB1. So I'm kind of wondering if they'll wait even longer to get their QB2. I'm not sure if any team is really in the mood to spend this much draft capital on a QB3, because that's kind of taken away from a player that could impact their team on a weekly basis. So I'm looking at possibly Carson Palmer if he's there, because I just think he has potential to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback, and to take him in the sixth round is kind of nice value to pair up with Philip Rivers. I think I'm set with my starting running back, so I don't really need to focus on that position right now. But Amir Abdullah is kind of tempting, especially with Chris Ivory already going in this draft. He's a guy I kind of like targeting as my running back. And then there's a bunch of receivers that I like, so I might go there just because I have two back-to-back picks. I know Gronk has been taken already. Travis Kelce is there, but I know he had some sort of injury in practice today, and nobody knows the extent of that yet. So I'm not sure if it's time to target him right now.
Oh yeah,
We
isn't
really
that the
don't
worst
know.
feeling? Is when we know he had some injury, but we don't know how bad it is yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like if he wasn't injured, like that didn't happen today, I probably would take him for sure right now. But with that uncertainty, I can't really afford to use a sixth round pick on him. So I'm going to have to pass on Travis Kelce, even though an unusual draft, I most likely would have taken them here in this spot.
So you're not afraid or unwilling to take tight ends or the elite tight ends in the first few rounds. It sounds like Kelsey would have been a fine pick for you here.
Yeah, this year I have no problem personally taking a Gronkowski or a Travis Kelce early-ish. So like those are really the only two tight ends. If the price is right, I will take early. But other than that, if I miss out on them, I'm gonna wait a long time until I take a tight end.
Yeah, I'm starting to be more of a believer in Greg Olson, just as
Yeah,
we see more and more how inept the receiving core there in Carolina is. He might be just the wide receiver one or the receiver one by default in Carolina.
no, yeah, he's. I think a lot of people are having him could be like the tight end four after those top three, because I think there's still a lot of people who do believe in Jimmy Graham. I'm just not really willing to pay the price for him this year. I just see him being more of a boost to Russell Wilson's fantasy potential.
Yeah, one thing I've kind of toyed around with the idea of in terms of these two quarterback drafts is thinking about your team as kind of like a three-legged table where each leg is quarterback, wide receiver, and running back, and how whatever you take first dictates how you have to continue to build your table as the draft goes along. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing I struggle with is really how does tight end fit into that mix. I don't really know. I tend to believe that waiting on tight end in a two quarterback league is probably that your best bang for your buck. But I can really I can see the argument for Kelsey. Here in the seventh, Gronkowski as a second or third rounder seems fine to me. I'm never willing to pull the trigger on those sorts of picks.
Right. It's almost like in the two quarterback leagues, no, tight end is, unless you have like a two tight end or you have the flex spots, tight end has become the onesie spot. So it's like rather than waiting on quarterbacks, you're waiting on tight ends.
Yep. So there goes Amir Abdullah right after Arian Foster. How do you feel about Foster this year? He's been kind of a hot button topic in recent weeks.
I mean, the I took a kind of a hiatus from the whole fantasy industry for a bit, and the very first draft I jumped into was a two quarterback best ball, so basically a two quarterback MFL 10.
Uh huh.
And my first pick was Arian Foster, like 3 days before his injury happened. Like I was really high on Arian Foster as a fantasy running back, but now, I mean, it's not as dire of a situation as we kind of thought immediately after the injury. And some people are saying, no, he might come back after 2 games, he might come back after 4 games. Like if there was a guarantee that you can tell me he's only going to miss 2 to 4 games, I would have no problem taking the risk of him in the mid rounds of a fantasy draft. I know our good friend, Rich Rebar, who works with you at the Fake Football, was talking about taking him in like the 8th round, and if you can get him there, I think that's kind of a steal.
Yeah, and this is about that time when you can start to consider him. Again, I tend to lean away from the guys who we know we're going to miss time early just because I do want to come out to a fast start in most of my leagues
Mm-hmm.
and try to pile up some wins early just
Right. I
to
mean,
kind of leverage that going forward.
exactly. I mean, at the same time, though, when you look at who's available, and if your options are like, at this point, Arian Foster, Andre Ellington, Doug Martin. I like Doug Martin. I like C.J. Spiller, but I think Arian Foster, in the long run, would give you a better chance of winning your league than say like a Joik Bell or a Rashad Jennings, for instance.
That's fair. Well, I went ahead and I pulled the trigger on my QB2.
Mm-hmm.
Just Jay Cutler, welcome to the team.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it kind of crazy? You just took Jay Cutler in the eighth round, actually 8.3803. Here's the guy that we are talking about last year going in like the first 2 rounds of a 2 quarterback league.
Yeah, and I do think the hate has gone a little too far on him.
Yeah.
He had a lot of interceptions last year, and we do know to some extent that a portion of interceptions is related to luck. And I don't know if how unlucky Jay Cutler was. It really did seem like a lot of those were just bad throws last season. But at the same time, he'll still threw for what, like 28 touchdowns. So I'm willing to take that risk here in the 8th round as my QB2.
28 to 18 touchdown INT ratio. He still was the QB 14 last year. I think people kind of just like focus on the really, really bad game versus like, the good, okay to good games.
Right. And if you can, have a third quarterback that allows you to stream Jay Cutler out for those bad matchups or those tougher matchups, you can exploit the schedule in that way to make it so he's less of a liability.
Exactly. Like I'm looking at his fantasy points per weekend. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks of 15 or more fantasy points.
That's pretty good.
No,
that's
people
all.
Are just kind of, yeah.
That's all I really want from my quarterback is 15 to 20 points every week.
Right. But people are just going to remember him getting benched week 16 and then not really doing much of anything week 17.
Right. All right.
And it's nice.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say it's nice because you can kind of use that recency bias to your advantage.
Right. And I mean, it swings the other way, too. We were talking about Roethlisberger earlier as a player who might be a little overvalued based upon what he did last season.
Yeah, exactly.
So who are you looking at here in the 8th and 9th rounds?
Like I said, I feel solidified at the quarterback spot with Rivers and Palmer as my starting quarterback, so I don't need to spend too much capital on QB3. So I think I'm just going to look at just adding depth to the running back and wide receiver positions on my team because I don't really want to there's no tight end right now that I want to take this early.
Mm-hmm.
So just all about like who's available, who I like,
and who's going to scratch that itch for you here at those positions.
So yeah, I'm looking. I like Deshaun Jackson still, and like pretty much the top passing option in Washington now. With Kirk Cousins there, I think it's kind of better for his fantasy potential than if RG3 was still around.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think this is for me. I'm not sure, but it feels kind of late that CJ Spiller was still on the board.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, I just added him to my queue because I was like, oh man, maybe I should have taken him over Cutler.
Yeah, and especially like if you're in a PPR setting, I don't think he would last until round 9. I know this is like a standard setting, but we're kind of just drafting just how we're looking at the overall landscape of things. So I feel like CJ Spiller should be able to return nice value as an RB2 in most leagues, and now he's my RB3, so which kind of just helps the depth of that position in case there's God forbid an injury to Bell or Hill.
I really have no idea what to expect from Spiller this year, and that makes him appealing and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by him and Ingram. I wouldn't really have an issue having both those guys on my team, depending on how the draft board fell. But I also have no issue, waiting to like bypass Ingram and then just waiting to take Spiller later if that happens, or even the other way around. I guess it all kind of depends who you're drafting with and who likes who more.
Yeah. So while I'm on the clock here, do you want to talk a little bit more about your site, kind of what motivated you to start it, and just in general what people can expect to find?
Sure, yeah. Like I've become known as the 2 quarterback on fantasy Twitter and the fantasy football industry, which kind of makes sense because that is what I was going for. So I've been kind of lucky to find a voice that I was able to use to cater to the 2 quarterback format. I know Superflex is starting to become really popular, and there's a lot of people I've become friends with who've gotten to know, include yourself on Twitter, who also have an affinity for the 2 quarterback format. And I was writing for XN Sports the past 2 years, and I kind of took a hiatus from the fantasy industry in general. And I just, things were going okay where I could kind of jump back into it. And I just felt like if I wanted to keep going at this, I feel like there should be like one site that caters to 2 quarterback and the Superflex format that people can go to, because I didn't really know what would happen when I got into the writing game, but I've noticed that there's more people than I thought that are into 2 quarterback leagues, and there's not really one specific place that they can go to get all the content they need that is catered just to them. I mean, there are some sites that will write about two quarterback and superflex, or some writers on sites like yourself that will talk about the two quarterback format. But when I got into it, there's really nobody doing it on a regular basis, and it was just like the general draft strategy. But I'm like, well, okay, we drafted our team, but then what do we do in season? Like, why is everything catered to one quarterback leagues in the traditional fantasy format? So that, no, I always had that in the back of my head when I was writing for other sites, that maybe one day I would start my own two quarterback site, and I was lucky to do that this week. And I just kind of feel like this could be a home for the two quarterback community, where I'll just throw out my two QB thoughts and just see what happens, and hopefully help other people, or just try to get more people interested in the format.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I love how just straightforward and simple the site is. Like, it's very easy to find what you're looking for, whether it's rankings or kind of the blog post that you've set up for like the mindset of two quarterback drafts, which I do think is very important to kind of distinguish this from other types of drafting, because it's much different. And the way that you lay out all the different draft strategies, studs and streaming, starting with quarterback, or going with late round guys, that's really cool. And in general, I know that you have a Q&A section set up here. I'm going to show that on the screen for everybody who's watching the video. And this is where you can, post your questions to Sal, and he'll answer them, regarding all your, two quarterback needs. And I think it's awesome that you've created this resource for the fantasy football community, and I wanted to, show that off for the viewers of this video.
I really appreciate that. Like I said, I just hope that people will get some use out of it, during the season. I know I kind of started late with most drafts ending, but the most important thing is I wanted to have that draft strategy section on the site to kind of highlight the different types of strategies you can take in a two quarterback league.
Yeah. Now, talking just a little bit more about that, what is your preferred strategy when it comes to these types of leagues?
Yes, I kind of mentioned a lot, but my preferred strategy has become the studs and streaming method. Taking one quarterback early, whether it's in the first round, the second round, third, or the fourth round, just one of the quarterbacks from like the top 10 or 12 tier, and then pairing them with two quarterbacks I can stream in season based on matchups. Streaming will be different in a two quarterback league versus a one quarterback league, because you're not going to have all those quarterbacks that are normally available in the waiver wire in a one quarterback league. So it's the actual definition of streaming doesn't apply completely, but rather you're drafting those two quarterbacks with the intent of streaming them in season. And I find that kind of brings you a little bit more value than if you were to take two quarterbacks early, because then it helps you fill out the rest of your roster with players at other positions rather than spending high draft capital on two quarterbacks early. So that is like my preferred method, but I'm really flexible to just how the draft is unfolding.
Yeah, and I think that is the overlying principle that you really need to hammer into your brain when you're doing these types of drafts, is that you need to kind of go with the flow of the draft. Mm-hmm. And what your opponents are doing really does need to dictate what you're doing to some extent.
I definitely agree with that. We'll take this draft, for example. I took Philip Rivers in round 5 with the intent of probably streaming the QB slot. But when a quarterback like Carson Palmer was still available in the 7th round, I found there's more value to take him as my QB2 rather than waiting until, let's say, round 9 or 10 to take a Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston and stream those two.
Yeah, I much prefer those kind of late round gamble guys as my third QB, just as more of like a lottery ticket or an insurance policy against the guys that I'm taking in the early to mid rounds. Like your Brady's, your Jay Cutlers, and your Carson Palmers.
Yeah, exactly. Now we have if you like to wait even longer, you can take like a Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, he's pretty exciting for two quarterback, isn't he?
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how that plays out.
I'm pretty excited. I was so out on the Bills passing game altogether. I just wasn't ready to draft any of those guys, and now I'm in. It's nice, scary, nice.
And especially because his draft cost was basically nothing.
Oh yeah, I even in a dynasty league that I drafted, actually with the faked goods guys in their league, I got a spot in that, and I took him really late, which I was surprised. I mean, not super surprised, because quarterbacks are pretty devalued in dynasty in general, but I really lucked into it with the breaks that he's got to start week 1 this year.